It seems to me that we've got sort of three categories here. We've got free thought, which is isolated, it's solitary, and can't cause any harm. You can think what you like in your own head. And then on the other hand, the other extreme, we've got free acting, which definitely can cause harm to others, and we want to restrict that. But in between the two, we've got this sort of fairly grey area of free speech. And because there is a link between speech and actions, we want to legislate against incitement. So it's not going to be easy to solve, is it?
Yeah, but I mean, on the other hand, I think that people, thank you, John. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, I think the difficulty is people always focus on the harm. Why not focus a bit more on the positives? Why not say that the starting point should be that everyone should be free to act in ways which ultimately will enable them to flourish, and speak and explore in ways which will enable them to flourish and live a fulfilling life, and be left with the responsibility of making mistakes. But then that should be the starting point. I think the problem is starting with the idea of harm and worrying that everything someone says or everything someone does might harm someone else. And also, I think that's very difficult because it's as we've seen with the hard left woke ideology. I think it's very easy to then start to say, well, whose harm are we talking about? Because different people may be harmed in different ways, and you may say one person's action harms another. Well, maybe the other person's action harms them in different ways. How are we going to decide? Who benefits, who harms? Maybe some people are benefited and harmed at the same time by some actions.
Yes.
So it's very complex, but for example, I think the trans situation is a case in point. Everyone, the pro-trans people say, well, look, trans people are harmed if you criticise them at all. But what about other people's rights? What about rights of women? And what about the truth? What about the harm to the truth? Is not society harmed if we start putting such great restrictions? So I think it's not just a question of avoiding all harm. I think we have to ask what degree of risk of harm are we prepared to put up with, because other things are also important, rather than this protectionist approach.
Yes, not everybody is harmed to the same degree. We have these snowflakes, don't we, who deem being offended as harmful.
Exactly.
The other question I wanted to throw at you, Emma, is, does free thought presuppose free will?
Oh gosh, that's a tricky question. Thank you, John. Gosh, that's going to keep me going. I suppose it must do, isn't it? I mean, it's impossible to think of the idea of thought being free, in a way that, because I suppose you could think freely without being able to act freely. And we've got Jason Hoblin there saying, "Oh, in Sam Harris territory, greatest amount of happiness for most amount of people." Well, yeah, because that's the utilitarian approach, which would then it has its own problems when we do that. How are you going to measure happiness and all that sort of thing? But I mean, it's sort of, I don't know. I would have to go back and think about that. It's a really deep question this time in the evening. But I mean, I think my gut reaction would be to say it doesn't make sense to talk about free thought without free will, because how can you decide what you even want to think about unless you have free will in the first place?